Greetings, I'm Ted Morrissey, and I'm here to read from my recently released novel, CROWSONG for the Stricken, which came out in August of 2017 from 12 Winters Press, which is my own press, and it appeared in hardcover in August, so that version is out and about. And then just recently, it's been released in paperback, which obviously much more affordable. And in particular, I'm going to read a piece called Beside Running Waters. I mentioned that this is a novel. I'm sure there are some folks who would dispute that somewhat and insist that it's a story collection of some kind or another. And I kind of debated for a long time about what to call it exactly. It does consist of 12 pieces, stories, vignettes, what have you. However, they all focus on the same central events in a small Midwestern town or village, mainly in the 1950s. A lot of the characters repeat, a lot of the images and ideas repeat, and in the beginning of the book, I encourage readers to look at the stories in whatever order they see fit, because as I was writing them, one of the things I was kind of playing with experimentally was this idea of creating what I call a prismatic novel, meaning that the central issues in the novel are going to appear differently depending on the order in which you read the different stories. They range in length from one very short story or vignette, The Ancient World, which is a little more than flash fiction. And I don't really think of myself as a flash author, so that was very unusual for me to write something that brief. But then the longest piece is The Curvatures of Hurt, and it's nearly 10,000 words long, and then everything else is kind of somewhere in between. And the story I'm going to read, Beside Running Waters, is on perhaps a little shorter than average, maybe a good choice for this particular medium. And anyway, the book came out in August. It's gotten some good reviews, and that's always good to see that. Before the book ever came out, CROWSONG for the Stricken, which was the first story that I wrote, was chosen by the editors of Flyleaf Journal for their reprint award, because the book had originally appeared in the little literary journal Noctua Review, but the editors of Flyleaf chose it for their Editor's Choice Award in 2015. So in January of 2016, CROWSONG for the Stricken came out in a little pamphlet style edition, which is what Flyleaf produces, with a specially designed cover, which is very cool. And anyway, that was very good to have that happen. And the editors at Flyleaf, in their information about the story, compared the writing to a couple of my sort of heroes, Ray Bradbury and Shirley Jackson. So that was also good to hear. I definitely was kind of channeling Shirley Jackson during some of the stories. Ray Bradbury, not so much consciously, but I certainly can see where they're coming from. And like I said, that's definitely a compliment to have that name thrown about in association with my writing. And then, as I said, since the book has come out, it's gotten a couple of reviews. Kirkus Reviews gave it a starred review, and they said, among other things, that it's a work that resists easy description and recommended for those looking for something strange and beautiful. I certainly can live with that. And then, rather unexpectedly, the author, Spencer Stevens, reviewed the book on his blog, completely unsolicited. So it was a nice surprise, especially compared when I saw all the really positive things he had to say about the book. One can only hope that one's work is read, with such intelligent sympathy, if you will, and he certainly seemed to get it. And as I said some really nice things about it. Among other things, that it's a book to savor for any writer in search of influence. And He goes on to say, every so often you come across an exquisite piece that ignores convention and is structured according to the peccadillos of the writer's imagination, and this is one. And I would say that certainly is true in terms of kind of structured after my own ideas. It took me about 4 years to write the book, and then a couple of years waiting for the last of the pieces to be published independently. And it was important to me that that happened, that each of the pieces came out on their own before I brought them out together in this book. And the last of the pieces came out in July of 2017 from Southern Humanities Review, a story called Sheol. And so that gave me the green light to release the book. But because of the fact that it did take a couple of years from the time I finished the book, as far as I was concerned, until the last of the pieces came out, I had a long time to think about the book as a whole and what I wanted to sort of do with it. I did try to get it commercially published. I tried to get the interest of literary agents to represent it. Didn't have much luck there. But the plus side to that was then I could do whatever I wanted to in terms of the layout of the book and the way the book is structured and so on. And so I ended up doing some things which are a little bit different in terms of the representation of the stories and so on, which probably another press, particularly a more commercially oriented press, wouldn't have gone for because they're too unconventional, quite honestly. So that was a plus too. So really the presentation of the book is yet another sort of layer of the narrative itself. And I'll just kind of leave that teaser out there with you. So maybe that will induce you to take a look at the book itself. But let me go ahead and get to the reading of the story beside Running Waters. By the way, a little disclaimer, I have a couple of dogs, and sometimes they get a little bit baffled by my talking to my computer, and so if they start barking and I need to let them out or do whatever, apologies ahead of time. But if you have dogs, you know. So anyway, I'll leave that there. Besides Running Waters, rather, first appeared in Constellations magazine, which is out of Boston, and then it was collected in the anthology Literature Today, Volume 4, and fairly recently, within the last, 6 months or so, it was also reprinted at commuterlit.com. And it's a story that I guess fits into that sort of odd but popular genre, teen paranormal romance. And most of the stories in the collection do not really fit that bill, but I think this one does. And so if you like that sort of thing, then maybe this will appeal to you in particular. The main character is a young lady, a teenage girl named Miranda, who doesn't really figure very prominently anywhere else in the book. Her name is mentioned in another story. And we're also introduced to a character named Egg Bishop, a teenage boy. And he doesn't play a huge role in this story, but then in another story called Erebus, Egg is one of the central figures. And then his grandfather, Bo Bishop, is a central figure in a kind of longish story called The Drama of Consonants. And so, as I said, it's one of those kind of books where characters are introduced and they come back, or maybe they do, or maybe they don't, but images and ideas are certainly repeated. So, without further ado, beside Running Waters. She stood in line at the filling station, the candy bar and cold bottle of soda in one hand, and the exact amount of money in the other, $1.17. Waiting on the customers ahead of her, Mrs. Willis and her son Charles, who everyone knew was slow. Mrs. Willis, in librarian-style tortoiseshell glasses, was resolute that Charles should pay for his hot dog, soda, and baseball cards by counting out the amount from his mason jar of coins. But the boy, 9 or 10, kept getting confused, and he was turning crimson under his stubble of white blonde hair as more and more customers gathered behind him and his mother, who was determined not to notice the lengthening line now stretched as far as the Eskimo pie freezer. She could feel the cold leaving her bottle of soda, and she wished that she'd left it in the cooler until she'd paid. But she wasn't irritated with Charles and Mrs. Willis. The girl marveled at Mrs. Willis's love for Charles and her endurance in pursuit of his success. though the boy would have gladly given up any of the items, perhaps all of them, to end the spectacle and retreat to the things he knew well, maybe things like fishing, greasing bicycle chains, mimicking birds. Those in line behind the girl didn't seem as patient. She sensed their mounting anxiety, which in turn made her anxious. Before long, she knew, the onlookers would notice her, and instantly Charles's counting and recounting couldn't keep their attention. The clink and scrape of the coins against the filling station counter were a nuisance as she strained to hear the phrase she despised. For 15 years she'd had a name, and in a moment no one seemed to recall it. For more than 18 months now she'd been the dead boy's girl. She looked out the filling station window. A slick of diesel on the cracked concrete glimmered rainbow in the summer heat. Even in grade school, they'd played at being boyfriend and girlfriend, and didn't mind their classmates teasing, so the joke soon grew old and ceased altogether. Their teacher must have thought little of it when, during quiet time, they would unroll their mats next to each other and hold hands as naturally as cloudbreak while music or a story played from a cassette. Perhaps Miss Hollis thought the phase would pass and boy and girl would return to their predetermined state of antagonism like cat and dog until she and the other teachers stopped thinking of it at all. By the time they were in junior high, it had long been conceded they would be together forever. She sometimes felt sorry for her friends who were in such constant turmoil over which boy liked them or that none did, that they liked some boy who didn't know they were on the planet, while the boy they couldn't stand mooned over them day and night. It must have been wearisome, and she had never experienced it. Outside, a pair of boys, uniformed in sleeveless shirts, threadbare jeans, and seed company caps, were filling gas cans preparing for a day of mowing. Their arms and necks, as brown as sycamore bark, were already becoming corded like their father's. The one in the blue cap was Everett Bishop, who everyone called Egg except his mother. The other, in a green cap, was Dale Stupig. Dale and Henry had been friends, sometimes played baseball in the Stupig's grass field when a break in chores allowed, half-empty seed bags for bases. She played a few times, but could barely hit the ball, which Henry tossed toward her in a gentle arc. She stopped playing, and Henry must have too. Still too young for a license, but old enough to drive the old F-150, which left behind flakes of rust wherever it had sat for more than a few minutes, Henry took them down Stevenson Lane across a finger of the Hewitts' property to a wooded stretch of Peach Creek, where spiny bluegill and pug-faced pumpkin seeds were plentiful and hungry for cricket bait in the shadowed water. Their catches would flop about in a metal bucket, cooling in the Peach's terracotta mud. One afternoon she watched the tendons of Henry's neck as he worked the hook from a pumpkin seed's throat, and her eyes followed those tendons like metal cables down his back where the muscles moved beneath the sweat-damp shirt, and she took in the rounded seat of Henry's jeans, where only threads and a darker patch of blue remained as evidence of the right pocket. A feeling came over her that she knew only by reputation. Not quite sure what she was doing, she told Henry the heat was getting to her, and she was going to rest in the truck. He looked back at her strangely. The heat never bothered her. She knew in a few minutes he would join her so that she could rest her head against his shoulder, which she would kiss and taste its salt. After that day, they began fishing every chance they got. In the fall, they developed a great fondness for hiking in autumnal foliage. When cold weather came, they visited friends, and the search for the perfect stand of Christmas trees became an ongoing odyssey which commenced with the first hard frost of November. The boys were finished filling the gas cans and were coming inside to pay and probably to get something cold to drink. She shifted her weight from left to right foot and back again. Egg Bishop had been very sweet at the funeral and the days that followed, and she needed the support. She felt as empty as the peach in winter, her will to get through each impossible day a faint trickle which at times disappeared altogether beneath a spread of ice. Then Egg began to act like he was interested in taking up where Henry had left off, which frightened her so, to think that someone might take Henry's place, that she stopped seeing and talking to Egg. In fact, she shut herself away from every boy in town, then from every one in town. She felt like the wine merchant in that Poe story, the one who is bricked inside the cellar wall, except she was both victim and bricklayer. She heard mumbles of voices from behind. She couldn't look because she knew Egg and Dale were at the end of the line, which she imagined stretched around the Eskimo pie freezer and snaked into the bread and cereal aisle. Soon it could form a U in the filling station, with the last customer standing back to counter next to scarlet-faced Charles Willis and his mason jar. She thought she heard the words, and the patience suddenly drained from her like coolant from a cracked radiator. She reached past Mrs. Willis and deposited the money on the counter, more forcefully than she intended, and she rushed from the filling station. Before the door swung shut, she heard a coin fall to the floor, but didn't know if it was one of hers or if she startled Charles and he'd fumbled a quarter off the edge of the counter. The day's heat fell upon her suffocatingly. She rubbered in behind the steering wheel of her gremlin, her bare legs sticking to the black vinyl seat, which was cracked and losing padding. She had a bottle opener on her keyring and used it. The soda was barely cool and tasted too sweet. She no longer wanted the candy bar that was melting in its wrapper on the passenger seat. She watched the filling station door open, and Mrs. Willis and Charles came out into the sunlight. The boy had his items, but he too seemed to have lost his appetite. Unable to control it, she began retching, pushed open the car door, and vomited the soda along with her breakfast of eggs and toast from 3 hours earlier. She wiped her chin with the back of her hand, shut the noisy door, and started the engine. Mrs. Willis, parked near the pumps, was stopped with her hand on her station wagon's door. She had seen the spectacle of the girls being sick. It was a hard look behind the tortoiseshell glasses, a face the girl could only interpret as anger without a trace of sympathy. She put the gremlin in first and drove off the filling station lot. Without considering her course, she left the main street and was quickly on County Road 12. She turned on the radio to the only station that picked up clearly, the AM Christian station from a neighboring town, and recognized Porter Wagner's "He Took Your Place." "Someday he's coming back to claim his own," the song said. She felt a warm drop on her bare right thigh and thought she'd missed something on her chin, but discovered she was crying. Another tear fell on her left thigh. She recognized the early symptoms of a migraine, the headache as spiny as bluegill beginning behind her eyes, the nausea, the sensitivity to light, sound, and touch. She turned onto Stevenson Lane, headed for the Hewitts' property, and switched off Porter Wagner. Pulling away from the lane, she immediately saw the path that had formed in the grass field, worn first by Henry's truck, then by her gremlin, whose tires fit easily inside the track of Henry's F-150. The gremlin's low-setting chassis bumped along a minute or more until she parked in the shade, heavenly shade, with the peach running before her in both sun and shadow. She turned off the engine and let back the seat, hoping a few minutes' rest would ease her head and stomach. Peach Creek's gentle bubbling filled her ears. She began drifting away as if carried by the Peach's steady current. In a moment, she felt the hand on her thigh, felt the fingertips kneading her damp flesh. She spread her legs to ease the hand's working, and fingers wriggled beneath the hem of her shorts. She must have emitted a little sound, but all she heard was the Peach's cool waters. The hand toyed with her until she squirmed in her seat, gripped the bottom of the steering wheel as if the gunwale of a storm-tossed ship. Her lips formed sounds more ancient than words. Then the hand spread across her womb, and it was as warm and comforting as a griddle cake, even with the calluses. It lingered there, gently pressing against her flesh, and she felt the pulse against the palm as its rhythm matched her own labored breathing. She reached down and put her hands over the hand that held her womb, and rather than muffle the beating pulse, it seemed to amplify it, and the reverberation spread to her arms and shoulders and throughout her young body until they returned to their genesis. She stayed that way a long while, thinking of this miracle that must be Henry's doing. Her mind flipped through images of her future, like photos in an album. The images were blurry, though, as if the speed of the film were out of sync, would be out of sync. There would be a child, but boy or girl? The pictures were too out of focus to say. Henry's blue eyes, she wondered, her brown hair, his broadness through the shoulders, her long legs. The hand remained on her womb, the pulse continuing to vibrate through her being. Then she felt the kisses on her shoulder, her neck. She felt the peach fuzz tickle of Henry's never-shaved lip. The kiss was upon her cheek, the lips brushing her earlobe. She heard the whisper of her name. She held tighter the hand. Miranda. But it came from another place. You all right?" She blinked at the sun crests on the creek. Egg Bishop was at her driver's side window. Someone was behind him at some distance. Must be Dale Stupig. She released her seat upright and looked at Egg, saying nothing while she started the engine and found reverse on the steering column. In a moment the gremlin was speeding over the worn path. She glanced in the rearview mirror, and in its jumpy image she thought she counted 3 figures standing watching her departure. Tears hot as August fell upon her legs. She tried to clear her eyes before pulling onto Stevenson Lane, but she was careful not to wipe the cheek where a touch of lips lingered, like a final kiss goodbye. Thank you.